Two men who know the angles, uncover and untangle all the questions and the webs left out to tangle. Be in 1962, last Wednesday's afternoon, they'll bend your ears with reckless self-abandon. The amazing Spider-Talk, the amazing Spider-Talk. Come swing through the air, sit back and prepare for the amazing Spider-Talk.
Hello, I'm Dapper Dan Gavazdan, and I'm the founder and editor of SuperiorSpiderTalk.com.
And I'm mischievous Mark Giannacchio, and I'm the founder of the Chasing Amazing blog and author of 100 Things Spider-Man Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us for a brand new episode of the all-new Amazing Spider Talk. We hope you enjoy this podcast and that it provides an intelligent conversation between two fans and collectors as we look at the Spider-Man comic universe in a bit of a bigger picture.
Yes, Dan, and for this particular episode, it's one of our special review Roundup episodes. What we've done for this episode of the show is we've strung together a bunch of our Patreon exclusive episodes where we review Amazing Spider-Man issues 789, 790, and 791 for you to listen to. Each of these episodes was originally released solely to our Patreon subscribers the week these comics came out, but we plan on releasing these Roundup episodes when each new storyline concludes, so about every 6 issues or so.
Yeah, it'll change as time goes on, but we're going to be doing the fall of Parker in these issues. We've already recorded our episodes recapping most of the Venom Inc. storyline up through part 4, and that includes Amazing Spider-Man 792, 793, Venom Inc. Alpha, and Venom number 159. So if you want to follow along with our reviews of Amazing Spider-Man as the issues come out, the week they come out, please be sure to join our Patreon Members Club. You can find us on Patreon or go to SuperiorSpiderTalk.com and click on our banner that reads Friendly Neighborhood Spider Talk Members Club and signed up.
So let's get this thing going. We're going to start off with our review of Amazing Spider-Man number 789. This is the issue that kicked off the Marvel Legacy Initiative in the pages of Amazing Spider-Man and restored Peter to a more classic status quo after the end of his multi-billion-dollar company, Parker Industries.
All right, I hope you guys enjoy the review.
What's new? Spider-Man still wearing red. Is it blue? Maybe he took a week off 'cause he had the flu. But probably not 'cause his red seems tried and true. Let's find out in the Spider-Man review.
Today we are going to be discussing Amazing Spider-Man. This is crazy to say it. 789. We're finally back to the legacy numbering. How exciting is that?
It is exciting. I know it's such a silly, non-essential thing. I mean, it's not like the number on the front of the comic makes me enjoy it more or less. It's about what's in the comic. But I don't know. The guy who's been collecting Spider-Man comics for almost 30 years now, who has all of them except maybe one annual, depending on what the outcome of that argument you and I had a few weeks ago was. It's cool to see that back. And I mean, not only is the numbering back, but like you can tell there seems to be a vision in both Spider-Man and just across Marvel's line of kind of getting back to its core and to the roots of what makes these characters so great, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a perfect issue to kind of discuss the positives and negatives of that, what that means for the kind of Marvel line. Certainly, I think, as we discussed on a recent episode of the show about the street fight in Spider-Man, this promises to be kind of a reboot back to basics for Spider-Man on the positive for people that want that. But then there's also the idea that, like, these characters aren't allowed to grow if they're made to be somewhat regressive every now and again. And maybe that's endemic to this kind of superhero comic line. And I hope we can get into discussing topics like that.
I don't know about you, Dan, but specific to Amazing Spider-Man 679, I definitely got a brand new Dave vibe to it, which to me was kind of the last time Spider-Man went back to basics, which, when you think back now is almost 10 years old, is more than 10 years old, which is pretty substantial. I mean, it doesn't feel that long ago, but it is, I mean, it's just kind of getting back to the root of who the character is, especially coming on the heels of something that was very outside, I feel, of everybody's comfort zones about what a Spider-Man comic should be. And that's not a criticism, but I mean, it definitely was outside our comfort zones, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's still some new wrinkles to this that are interesting. They're new in like a very kind of like gray tones sort of way. It's like the fine details that are kind of new about this status quo that I'm excited to see play out. But yeah, this issue is, falls right in my comfort zone in what I regard as a Spider-Man comic.
Yeah, and I mean, it's, just for those who haven't read it yet or have read it and need refreshing, I mean, it's the part 1 of the fall of Parker. We're now dealing with the fallout of, where Peter Parker's life is post Parker Industries and him basically dissolving his company to save it from the many tentacles of the superior octopus and Hydra, which is just, speaking of outside our comfort zone, it's just kind of outrageous things to be saying. Hydra and Spider-Man fighting Hydra and Doc Ock, with superior Ock. I mean, it seems a little crazy. And it's we're back to Peter, the kind, the loser, if you will, but also the outcast. I mean, he's some of this has been kind of self-imposed, but it seems like as of right now, there's really only one friend in Peter's universe, and it's kind of this odd, somewhat awkward relationship with Bobby Morse / Mockingbird.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things before we even get into the content of this issue, and I guess it has something to do with the content of this issue, is early on in the Parker Industries Volume 4 era, we had discussed, eventually this is going to have to be undone, right? Like, he was never going to be Tony Stark forever. Although certainly sometimes it felt like it. So they had to get him out of this, and one of the things that we kind of were worried about was how do you get him out of that situation without making him a loser? And I think we both agreed that the previous, I guess, 2 issues ago, with the actual end of Parker Industries, that they handled it quite well by having Peter make a decision that maybe from the outside he would look like a loser or something, but the readers would know that he had made a good decision that was an honorable decision that didn't really tarnish his character more than it tarnishes his ability to kind of do both the good he wants to do and operate a business. Do you feel like that decision holds true in this issue? Is Peter made to look like a loser, or is he still kind of the strong character that we want to read about while also being a business failure?
I think it's a little of both. I mean, there is a scene where that kind of nuance and detail is right in the text. I mean, I'm thinking of when Peter marches, and to me, this was a genuinely funny scene in the comic. Peter marching into the Daily Bugle newsroom where, and kind of attempting to chew out Robbie for putting a headline of Peter Parker menace. And, he basically makes his argument like, don't you know that he did this for the better good? And then Robbie kind of lays out, yeah, but in doing that, he also, put millions of people, millions is a lot, by the way. I mean, I guess it's possible that there are millions of employees, but I mean that might be a little hyperbolic.
Wasn't he also including the webware owners?
I guess so.
I think you'd have to.
Yeah, but people are out of a job. People who are relying on this technology can't use it anymore. I mean, it's kind of, and there's a currency to it and a meta-ness to it in terms of what's going on in the real world right now, where if a billionaire decides to make a decision, the ramifications can be huge. You know what I mean? In terms of even if they feel it's for the better good or not. I mean, it relates to the news, and Peter kind of makes his case here, and he kind of gets shut down, and he kind of backs down like, yeah, I guess you're right. But at the same token, he's still got that information out there as a reminder in case someone was just jumping in. Like, yeah, this is not all in a vacuum. Like he made he chose being a hero over being a good businessman, and we know that. But the fact of the matter is, in choosing to be a hero, he in turn became a bad businessman. So it was a no-win situation, and I think we talked about that in our last episode, or not our last episode, but our episode where we talked about the end of Parker Industries, where it's like it mirrored things like Crusher Hogan and these other great stories from the past, where it is no win for Peter. So what do we do from there?
Well, I'm so happy that you say that, because especially about the business choice not operating in a vacuum, because I felt like after Superior Spider-Man, all the actions of that series operated in a near vacuum. Like there was no real repercussions for the choices made in that series. And here it seems to be all repercussions. And to me, that's what's valuable about serialized storytelling, is that each thing matters to the next story, building on top of it. And this felt like a very organic next step for the character. Do I love that Peter is living on someone else's couch and kind of wallowing in misery? Not really. It's not how I want to see the character be long term, but it's a realistic moment for the character, and one that I expect to see developing over the course of this particular arc, the fall of Parker. If he's going to have a modicum win at the end of this story, whatever the story shapes up to be, I imagine it will be to some degree coming to terms with the choices that he made, and the larger effect of them.
Yeah, and I get what you're saying about couch surfing Peter, and is this really a long-term direction for the character? And I agree it's not. But at the same token, again, I felt that there were some genuinely funny and just nice character moments that came from couch surfing Peter. I mean, especially vis-a-vis Bobby Morse, who, for the most part, this is a relationship. Not that I hadn't cared about it, but I didn't feel truly invested, but I feel like in light of this new kind of status quo shift, the fact that she's basically the only one that is having him there without judgment for what he did as a business. She has plenty of judgments for how he lives and, his inability to do laundry and things like that. But I mean, I felt that these were kind of cute character moments, and it was making the pairing seem more endearing to me for the first time. I don't know if you felt that at all, or if it's still not working for you.
No, it's totally working for me. I mean, I find it endearing that not only is she able to look aside him, he also has great respect for her for what she did by kind of leaving S.H.I.E.L.D. In a key moment to help him out. So there's a sort of a mutual respect that the relationship is founded on. Even when he is in a dark moment, she understands where he's coming from. And that, to me, is really kind of honest to a lot of healthy relationships. Even though I think if he continues to just be a crouch surfing bum, this relationship might be headed south quickly. But I'm honestly excited for this. I know we got like the kind of like Kitty Pryde relationship in the Ultimate Comics, but this to me seems like a Black Cat kind of thing, but without the negatives of her being a sometimes villain thief, So I'm curious to see like what this relationship might look like in the pages of Amazing Spider-Man as a kind of dynamic we've never seen before.
Yeah, I mean, she's every bit his equal. I mean, that seemed, and we really haven't had that in a relationship with Peter since MJ, if you think about it, in terms of, and when we talk about MJ being the equal, I mean, it's not even, it's later MJ, you know what I mean? Like after years of development. So, yeah. But there's not the moral dilemma that comes with Black Cat, nor is there kind of like the, Bobby is special because the writers are keep telling us that she's special, that we've had with past girlfriends like Gwen and Carly Cooper and people like that, where it's like, what is the actual chemistry between the characters here? Yeah. I mean, she's a superhero. She's a top-notch spy. She has a life outside of Peter. I mean, and I guess that will be the complication is, will those lives interfere with each other? But for the most part, it like I said, I feel like they're equals in a lot of ways. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. But it's also something I want to keep an eye on. You say that they're equals, and previously we've kind of dinged this comic for having, Spider-Man often play backseat to his supporting cast, who often gets him out of scenarios, and that's sort of true in this issue, right? He's kind of wallowing in his own failure, and she is able to kind of like take him out on the streets and remind him, of the good things that he does, and I think that's a really warming thing. I want to keep my eye on it and be sure that they are portrayed as equals to a certain degree, and it's not Mockingbird that's always kind of supporting the relationship in a very one-sided way. It would be great to have a relationship, not only like, a emotional and loving relationship if it gets to that point, but also a like kind of like a relationship between a supporting cast character and Spider-Man where they are treated as equals and they're not always bailing Peter and Spider-Man out from one scenario after the next, if that makes sense.
Totally fair. And by the way, I mean the Peter Bobby moment, when they're out and about. I mean, this is a thing that Slott has kind of gone back to a few times over the last few years. Let's find a random loser villain and have Spider-Man fight it for while other stuff is going on, to kind of like almost serve as a fight while exposition is going on. But I gotta say, it's worked almost every time, and I feel here using the Griffin to kind of advance the relationship with Peter. It was great. I enjoyed it. I thought it was great. Just like when we had what was it, the iguana and Peter and who was he? Was he with someone at that point, or he was like on the phone, right, or something?
Yeah, he was on the phone. I think with Anna Maria during that.
Yeah. And then, of course, we had the White Rabbit, and in Volume 3. I mean, these are fun scenes, and like I said, I enjoy using a very kind of low stakes villain to kind of push those narratives forward.
Yeah, especially when Dan Slott inserts his own sort of like mocking of villains' motivations. Like here, he's just like, I don't need money. I'm just going to go straight for the empanadas,
Yeah, I'm going to spend the money on the empanadas, so I might as well just steal the empanadas.
Yeah, that was great. And Immonen, of course, like, I mean, we'll get into him, but like the way he rendered this villain, it's like, oh, this guy is so visually interesting. Like, what a great choice for, if you're going to have him beat up on someone, might as well be someone as cool looking as the Griffin.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the Griffin is a cool looking villain, period, but for the most part is a very lame villain.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just kind of another thing to note in this comic, and I talked about this in the review. I mean, I felt like there was definitely a lot of focus and work played into reestablishing Peter's core supporting cast, and by that I mean like the old guard. And I know we had a lot of supporting cast during Parker Industries with Anna Maria and Philip Chang and what's her name? Lay? I can't remember. I'm terrible. I'm sure I'll get hate mail for that, like every time I say Sanjani wrong or whatever.
Well, your mispronunciation or lack of knowledge about this name kind of says everything you need to say about those characters as supporting characters in that volume.
Right, and I know, like I guess I don't want to say I misspoke, but I kind of made it sound like in the review that Philip Chang was a new character. I meant more like kind of as part of a regular part of the cast. It was a newish thing over the last year or two with Parker Industries because he was part of the Parker Industries cast. But like as far as I'm concerned, when you talk about Peter's Spider-Man supporting cast, we're talking about Flash and Harry and Betty and MJ and Robbie and Jonah and everyone, and Aunt May, of course, and everyone but Jonah is in this issue. And we even have like subplots developing with Harry and Liz Allen, and Betty's still doing her thing. Flash is, I guess they're probably teasing the Venom story coming up and what Flash's involvement may or may not be in that. And it just felt, again, like very comfortable, and I love these characters. There's a reason why they're the classic characters. I mean, am I overstating how they're being used here, or is this just nostalgia talking, or did you feel that they were used well here?
No, I loved it. It's like going back to a shorthand that's very comfortable, and the Daily Bugle showed up in a sizable way. It hit every note right, and it makes you wonder, like, why would they ever deviate from this? Like, maybe it's to make it feel special again, but just by doing a simple Spider-Man thing, it suddenly feels special all over again.
Yeah, and to go back to what I said earlier in our review, Dan, I mean, it's very reminiscent of Brand New Day, and I know that people kind of take their shots at Brand New Day because Brand New Day came forth from One More Day, but you and I have been on the record many times over and saying that the story, Brand New Day itself, and the stories that came from Brand New Day were great. Like, it was like the most alive and vibrant that the Spider-Man comic had been in years. Like it felt like it had a new lease on life, and and there were new characters that were certainly part of the cast then, like Lily Hollister and there were new
mayoral candidates and
the mayoral candidate, Carly Cooper, who I mentioned earlier. But like at the end of the day, we were still focusing on that. I mean, there was a great Peter Betty Brant issue. There was the great Flash flashback issue, which is probably one of the best like one and done stories we've had in recent memory on this comic. There was great Harry stuff in that. I mean, obviously the Daily Bugle or the DB and Frontline. I mean, we're all essential to this comic. Like I think I said in the review, play the hits. Just play the hits. It works. Just stop. I know you. There's a lot of artistic integrity and like that 9-minute jam that you came up with one day, but just play the hits.
But every once in a while, you got to take a swing for a superior Spider-Man, right? I mean, like that. That's what our show was started on. All of this comes from our passion about that book. I just think doing that over and over and over again, you kind of want the comfortability of the hits. And you said it in your review, and I totally agree with it. This feels like what Volume 3 was supposed to be. A return with lingering consequences. And I'm, to my mind, the more I think about it, like even the less I blame Dan Slott, is that like there seemed to be these forced events that we had to hit, and it threw that off, gear. And if like 6 months from now, I knew, or even like a couple months from now, I knew there was a big event coming up, and maybe this Venom story is this big crossover. Although I don't think so. This book, we like the first issue of Volume 3 as well, so. It could be, that this is a flash in the pan and we're headed back towards that kind of thing. But it seems to me like Legacy is saying we're not doing events. And to me, that's really exciting because I'm hoping that they can stay at this level of quality throughout this continuing run.
Yeah, because there already seems to be a discernible difference because, I mean, we were a few issues into Volume 3 and then we were getting Original Sin and Silk and Cindy Moon being introduced. And like that, like to me, that was kind of the beginning of the end. I mean, we didn't love how the first arc on Volume 3 finished out, but I don't think we were like really upset with it. But it was kind of like from Silk on where things started to get really squidgy, and then we ended with Spider-Verse, which when you think about it wasn't even supposed to be a Peter story. It was originally meant to be a Superior Spider-Man story that got changed. And in retrospect, there was kind of like there's been this conversation of, oh, how can you do a Spider-Verse event without Peter? But the way it ended up, maybe there was a reason why it was pitched without Peter, right? I mean,
in some ways, it read like a Spider-Man story without Peter.
Yeah. I mean, the Peter elements were the most forced and uncomfortable parts of the whole storyline. So, I think there's something to it. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like, Dan Slott and his execution of certain story elements are now without fault, but when you kind of put everything together and see where Dan Slott's been over the last 6 months, I'd say. I mean, he's been on a pretty good streak now, I'd say. You might be able to kind of look back in with hindsight and say, maybe that wasn't really his fault, or all his fault. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people like to blame editorial all the time, and we're I don't know if we're necessarily saying that, but like it's this kind of overall idea about Marvel. There was a reason they needed to do this legacy thing, and I think this book, to me at least, feels like ground zero. Like this is what legacy is promising to the readers.
Just don't blame sales, or Tom Brevoort will yell at you on the internet.
Yeah, you're right. It certainly nothing is motivated by sales. I couldn't imagine.
Right, but in all seriousness, if you put aside the sales, which is a big thing to put aside, but if you put aside the sales, I mean, like there was definitely a sense that things with Marvel was kind of a runaway train and running and just kind of getting away from everybody, and this really feels like a very deliberate recentering that was needed. I think it is needed. I mean, we'll see where it goes from here, but between this issue and then the legacy issue that we talked about last time, I mean, it seems like they're really trying to cultivate and procure trust again in terms of like, we know who our characters are and what makes them great. And I think that's just what we got to keep coming back to. I mean, I know I keep saying that statement a lot, but these are great characters. These are some of the greatest characters in comic books. There's no reason that DC characters outside of Batman should be making Marvel eat its lunch. So, make those characters great.
I agree. Now, let me ask you about the kind of like going back to the classic characters and their kind of classic characterizations. That's all great, and we're loving this. But there is a potential downside to this, and fans equally complain about this as well, like not allowing Peter to mature, right? He wasn't really allowed to have a child. They whisked that away from him. He wasn't allowed to be married. He wasn't allowed to, like all these things that would allow the character to grow. And say what you will about, Big Time and Parker Industries and all that stuff, it was an attempt to allow Peter to grow into a new role, right, and challenge who he is and what he does as a hero. And putting him back in this way, we'll see what they do with it. It does feel like a regression in some ways, even though it's being handled quite naturally. It does seem like a way to put him back where he's comfortable and not necessarily allow him to grow. And I think that's even reflected in the really weird moment in Spider-Man 2. I don't know if you've been reading that series, where Peter comments that he's only 3 years older than Miles. It's like literally, like whether that comment is true or not, he seems to be kind of shackled to being young and youthful. And if he was only 3 years older than Miles, that makes him like early 20s, which is not right. So something was weird going on in that book, but there is a sort of arrested development on the Peter Parker character, and I wonder if you fear at all that this reset is another version of that, and that we're just kind of glossing over it because we're enjoying it in the moment.
I mean, I think I got to see where it goes. I think it's too early to say that. I mean, if there has been one consistent thing about Dan Slott since he took over as the sole writer of this book is that, he is always trying to push Peter in new directions. I mean, he never settles for just doing it. You know what I mean? Heck, even when he was writing as part of Brand New Day, I mean, it was his stories that always kind of felt the most boundary pushing. So, I mean, let's see what happens. But, of course, if the character stagnates, I find that problematic. But, at the same token, we're 10 years removed from kind of the last time we went over this ground, which might sound like, okay, I mean, you and I have been reading since then and then some, but for a lot of people, this is new ground,
Yeah. And there is new ground here. Like, I don't think we've ever seen Peter so publicly disliked. Like, that's really interesting. So that isn't necessarily it could be a new ground if that's what they stick with through this run.
I mean, think about it in these terms, Dan. In the 90s, when it was the Clone Saga, 10 years before the Clone Saga, it was Roger Stern and Tom DeFalco writing Spider-Man. You know what I mean? And it's so like, it's like a lot happens in 10 years. You know what I mean? Like like people come on the book, people come off the book, readers come on and come off the book, editorial comes on and comes off the book. So like, just because we're kind of going back to this well of a more traditional Spider-Man doesn't really mean that it's stagnated, because I mean, I certainly wouldn't say that Roger Stern and Tom DeFalco Spider-Man was stagnated, but it certainly was more traditional than the Clone Saga.
That's true.
where we had progression to the point of a major fault with the character.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's just something that's like endemic to superhero comics. You know what I mean? And like that people kind of like want to read the essence of the character to some regard. And I also think that this seems like a natural progression for the character, whether he's returning to familiar ground or not. So I don't certainly see the problem with it. I just thought it was something we should address, because it is a common complaint that people have, is that like, this character's never allowed to really grow,
right.
And I certainly can imagine some fans reading this and being like, oh, a loser Peter Parker, haven't we been there before? So
right.
There's even a big piece on IGN right now about this.
Okay. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Although, I mean, again, to my point, I think we're far enough removed where the fan base might look different than how it looked the last time we went over this ground. I mean, like, we got to remember that, sad to say, Dan, you and I are not the target audience of this comic anymore. Like we're I mean, yes, the legacy numbering targets us, but other than that, it's like, the goal is still to bring new readers into the fold and to kind of procure and cultivate the readers that came on over the last few years or so, where, the old farts who will buy the comic no matter what, they know they have us in the bag. So
I've lost all my hair since Brand New Day.
There you go.
And maybe it's related. I don't know.
I was single and without child during Brand New Day, with the start of Brand New Day.
Your past 10 years seem far more eventful than mine. I lost hair, and you gained a family member and a wife.
There you go. Well, you gained a wife.
Yeah, that's true. You're right. I'm married.
And you have 2 cats now.
I do. So there we go. Improvement.
You wanted to talk a little bit more about Immonen earlier. I think we should just hit to that before we get to our grades. I mean, what is there else to say about Stuart Immonen? I mean, is it a coincidence that this book has really just hit a new gear since he came on? I mean, I'm sure there are other factors that are contributing to the very big increase in quality in this book, but my goodness, he just brings it every issue, even in an issue that's relatively quiet like this one.
He's able to sell every emotional beat too. Like it's the artists are like the directors in a lot of way. Like they can really shape the performances of the actors, right? In this case, it's the characters drawn on the page, but like there's not a face or a body posture in this that's not really well thought through. That doesn't also convey like a lot of emotion and really bring these moments to life. I mean, Peter in this book is totally different than he was drawn a couple issues ago in regards to his body language. Like, he's slumped over, he's kind of messy, his hair is up and all askew. I mean, it communicates everything you need to know through the imagery, and I think Dan Slott has been wise to kind of rein himself in, I think, a little bit, because he doesn't need to be more flowery with his language like maybe he would have to do with Common Coley, which is nothing against Common Coley, but like Stuart Immonen is in a league all of his own as a comic book artist, if you ask me. And this book is operating on a level that maybe Amazing Spider-Man books have rarely, if ever, operated on in terms of art.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking for a while. I mean, and again, this is no disrespect to Camo or Humberto Ramos or any of the people who have illustrated Spidey over the last decade or so, but we really haven't had a superstar artist on this book probably since JRJR. I mean, and I mean, I guess you could make a case for Marcos Martin, but his work is so sporadic. Like it's never like a prolonged, creative run of art, and considering that Amazing Spider-Man is one of Marvel's flagship books, you would think that they would want to get one of their A-listers on it, and they just haven't for whatever reason. But Immonen kind of breaks that trend, and it's just so night and day in how this book is sold. I mean, talking about directing the scenes and whatnot. I mean, like I'm thinking back to even Peter kind of marching into the Daily Bugle. I mean, the framing of that panel, and it's not even a close up of Peter. It's him in a distance in a hoodie, kind of looking like a crazy bagman yelling in the middle of a newsroom, and there's all this space around him as like the reporters are just kind of looking at him like disgustedly. It's a great moment where the humor of it is really sold by just how Immonen frames the entire scene. It's just like you said, it's these little things. This is not a big action comic this time around. There's only a few scenes of Peter actually in Spider-Man garb, and of course those were beautifully rendered, and there's the fight with the Griffin, which was great, and the Griffin looks great, but it's all these little scenes that of people out of costume and interacting, Harry and Liz and their little secret tryst, and there's all these great interplays with these different characters, and there's chemistry between these characters, and I think it's Immonen bringing it home. I mean, it's yes, Slott is obviously scripting it, but Immonen is bringing it home.
I'm thinking of Robbie Robertson's knowing look out at the reader about Peter's, potential role at the Daily Bugle, working in the science, section of the paper. But another thing that really, you just talking about all these things going on, another thing I'm so glad of is there's no need to include an overarching villain for this arc and introduce it in this book, right? There's no winks and nods to playing the long game, right? There's no 2-page cutaway to another scene that has nothing to do with the main story being told in the book. There's no setup for an event that's going to come 18 months from now. It's just telling this story. And thank God, that has been a plague on this title for years. And this is so fresh and just focused.
Absolutely. No, it's really great, Dan. Any other comments on this before we wrap?
No, I'm just so excited about this book again, and the past few months have really just turned me around on this creative team and the editorial staff that's backing it. I hope that this is if every Marvel book is like this, I'll read every single one of them.
Excellent. So what's your grade?
I'm giving this one an A-.
And I'm right there with you. A- for me as well. It's just really job well done. Well, everybody, I hope you enjoyed listening to that review. I know some of you are probably thinking, man, that issue came out forever ago. I'd really like to listen to this the week it came out. Well, that's why you should just subscribe to our Patreon page so you could do exactly that. Remember, if you click on the podcast or the icon on superiorspidertalk.com, you can get to our Patreon page, and for just $3.99 a month, Dan, that's the price of one comic, you can join us as we record these episodes.
Yeah, and I hope you do, because it's really a great way to support what Mark and I do and allow us to keep doing shows like this one, book guests for our regular show, and find time for all the research it takes to put together all the various seasons of our show like ours. But enough plugging, Mark. Let's get on to the next review episode. This time you and I discussed Amazing Spider-Man number 790, so I hope you guys all enjoy listening to this. Today we're going to be talking about Amazing Spider-Man 790. I love saying these big numbers. This one, of course, is the second volume in the Fall of Parker story with Dan Slott writing and Stuart Immonen on the pencils. Another exciting chapter in this new era of Spider-Man. Mark, let's just get right into it and talk about this book, because it's an interesting one.
Yeah, it's funny, Dan. And from some of the kind of usual routinely critical places on the internet, like I saw some talk of, it's Spider-Man versus Human Torch and over the Baxter Building again. We saw this during Volume 4, during I think it was Amazing Spider-Man number 3, which is true. We did see it, and there was a repetitiveness to it, there's no question. But I still feel like I liked this a lot more because, again, I feel like since this book, I don't know if you call what it is a reboot or whatever, or renumbering, has ever since Legacy has started, I feel like Dan Slott and Marvel, they're really trying to get us really deep and reacquainted with these characters again and how they're all involved with each other and the dynamics of it. And Peter's B-cast really feels important again in a major way that we haven't had in years. So seeing him go at it with Johnny, whereas was quite familiar, just also felt more justified and personal this time. And there were stakes. It felt like, I don't know, I thought there were more stakes to it. What about you?
Yeah, I agree. It's a repercussion, right? Like, we're feeling the repercussions of a failed promise. And to me, that makes sense. I still don't know if I buy that these two guys would, throw down in such a, dangerous way, not only to people and property, although Dan Slott is sure to spell out that the building has been emptied. It just feels very irresponsible for these two guys who seem to be fighting in somewhat with their tongues in their cheeks, if you will.
Right.
There's a jokiness to it. And that's a hard thing to get past, but I totally buy, how angry Johnny would be. And I think it's beautifully rendered by Immonen with these kind of, images of Johnny just, absolutely in flame that are really wonderful. To me, that wasn't the highlight. Their fight wasn't really the highlight of this issue.
No.
The highlight to me is just the continuing of this continuity, and
yes.
the repercussions of what Peter has decided to do, and that we aren't moving on from it. That is the exciting thing to me. Seeing Peter in boardrooms apologizing to people. It's not the most exciting comic book stuff, but it's doing what I've always wanted this book to do for years now, since the end of Superior, which is, stick with something and actually follow through on it. And that, to me, is exciting.
Yeah, and to your point about Johnny and Peter, again, it's more showing the consequences of those failed promises, which is something that, we haven't had in a Spider-Man comic in a while, this idea of consequences. I mean, the whole idea, we just spent over an hour, Dan, talking about the origin story and what it means and its importance and why it gets redone and the value of it. And the fact of the matter is, I mean, at the end of the day, Spider-Man is a story about responsibility. It's a story about consequences. How Peter's actions have very large ramifications, even when he doesn't mean them to have those ramifications. And this reboot, or whatever you want to call it, is not shying away from that. And like, I really kind of tip my hat the way you are here to Dan Slott and to Marvel for sticking with it and for like not being afraid to maybe sacrifice something that's not as visually arresting for something that is more true to these characters and is reflective of what these characters should be going through right now.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. I do want to return to Peter having consequences for his actions when we talk about when Clash comes into this story, because there is a moment in this issue that strikes me as rather odd given Peter's origin story. But I do want to spend time talking about like Peter and the fall of Parker Industries, because I really like Harry Osborn's role in this book.
You mean the condo flipping finance bro?
Yes. And I misspoke. Harry Lyman.
Right.
I want to be clear on that. He's supportive of Peter in a way that, it's truly how a friend would be. And I appreciate that we're not headed down the path of Harry becoming this kind of vindictive, ex-business partner, at least not yet. He seems supportive like a friend would be, and I like this turn for the character. Now, by the end of the issue, he's like storming off in anger, but, I imagine it just means more complications for Peter down the line in terms of having to corral Harry a little bit. But, we're not diving straight into kind of like enemy territory here. In fact, there's not really a villain in this book. I mean, he fights with Human Torch and he fights with Clash, but then ends up teaming up with both of them too. So it's an interesting path to go down.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, and I think I mentioned this in the initial review I did a few weeks ago, I mean, like, and you and I have kind of talked privately about this, Dan. I mean, the lack of a villain is probably the one demerit against this story so far. Like, I'm kind of waiting for something beyond like these like little passing battles, whether it be the Griffin or Clash was kind of the villain that came and went here. At the end of the day, this is still a Spider-Man comic. You kind of want to see whether it's Doc Ock or Norman Osborn or Electro or Sandman or whoever. You want to see like as Peter is dealing with being at rock bottom, who's going to be the villain that kind of rises up that makes him have to not only deal with his business life being in disarray, but his Spider-Man life being in disarray, because that seems to be the one thing that's not in disarray right now. Yeah.
You know what? I'm willing to wait for Venom in the next arc to make a big reappearance, because that's something I've been waiting for forever. A proper battle between Spider-Man and Venom. So right now, I'm just enjoying this. But back to the point you made about Spider-Man being like the more comfortable role for Peter. What with Peter Parker being so publicly shamed. I'm hoping that by the end of the next issue that this kind of fallout of the Parker persona and issues continuing on after that kind of goes somewhere, I guess, particularly in regards to his life in New York City. Because right now I feel like emotionally it's really connecting for me, but I'm curious what it means for the character that's slipping into the role of Spider-Man is an easier thing for him to do right now. We've seen this kind of before. There's that whole like weird, the Spider era of the book where he kind of fell into that persona. I don't feel like this is going to that kind of a dark place, but it's a theme that's repeatedly being hit So I'm hopeful that this goes somewhere beyond just kind of lip service in these first few issues to be like a big part of this continuity, like in this new story that Dan Slott's going into. Because I think there's a lot of material there for, in reintroducing the cast in a big way, but having Peter Parker be the difficult part of his life.
Yeah, definitely. Just a little nerd note here, Dan, that you picked up on. I didn't notice this. What was Clash's hideout in this story?
Yeah, so Clash's hideout in this story is the Beyond Forever nightclub, and truly nerdy Spider-Man fans will pick up that the Beyond Forever nightclub is where we met the Hypno Hustler for the first time. That's the nightclub that it was at.
Dan, you are just becoming the master of Easter eggs, man. Between this and all your Spider-Man Homecoming stuff, I don't know. You're putting me to shame, man.
Mark, you continually put me to shame, but it's arbitrary nonsense like this that I can pick up on. You know what it was? It seemed so specific that I was like, oh, why would they name this? I don't know what this Beyond Forever nightclub is, and I was thinking, what nightclubs would possibly be? And I just opened up my issue of, the Hypno Hustler and was like, oh, there it is. It's the Beyond Forever nightclub. So there you go. That's what it is.
This issue also seemed, I believe, to have the first Spider-Man in continuity appearance of Shake Shack.
Yes, I was particularly pleased by that. Shake Shack is the ultimate burger place. In our burger chain. I don't care what any of my LA residents say about In-N-Out. It doesn't compare.
I'm not really arguing with you, Dan. I mean, I'm just shocked that, Mr. California here is not praying at the altar of In-N-Out. So, interesting.
I may live in California, but my culinary tastes live in New York.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm gonna just throw a bomb into this and say, I don't know if waiting 45 minutes for a burger like you would at Shake Shack is worth it at the end, no matter how good the burger is. But it is a good burger. I will say that.
All right.
And their concretes are good too, which is what they call their shakes.
Oh, the shakes are great. Oh yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, we digress, Dan.
Don't get me started because I'm liable to start up on how I feel about LA bagels, and we don't want to go down that route again.
That's not they're not bagels, whatever they are.
No, they're not.
Yeah. Anyway, what else you want to talk about on 790 here?
Well, let's talk about Clash and his reappearance because it's certainly interesting. He's returning to kind of his Robin Hood role that we got established, a few issues back, in that kind of, bonus-sized Amazing Spider-Man 25, right? That's where that was kind of revisited?
Yes. Also worth noting that, this book was, Dan Slott plotted it, Christos Gage wrote the dialogue, and Gage, I think, I don't know, would you argue, has the best Clash so far out of everyone?
Yeah, I mean, if we're counting kind of the Civil War II story,
yeah, I would think so.
The best, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think this is a pretty good iteration of Clash here. His justification for wanting to get back into Parker Industries before it shuttered down completely and get back the tech that he invented, totally justifiable, which is pinpoint definition of a good villain is, are they justifiable? Are their actions justifiable? And I would say that that's the case here. So, again, it's working in these little bits, what we're seeing with Clash lately.
I liked all that. I wish we got to see some of Clash's powers because I think they're always fun to see visually on the page with letting the letterer kind of go crazy.
Yeah.
But I was a little disappointed in how this whole thing wrapped up, that we were talking about repetition with the Human Torch story, but this actually seemed like a big repetition for me, even further back to the first story in Big Time with that kind of sonic reverberator thing that could destroy the whole block. That's where we go again, and we have these people fighting to disarm this bomb, which I feel like Dan Slott has done a number of times, and I was not really invested in that. And then Spider-Man just kind of lets Clash off the hook, which he's like, well, he meant to do good, so I'll just let this burglar go away. And for that being Spider-Man's origin story, to, not let people get away, like, it kind of smacked me as like, shouldn't you be the absolute wrong guy for this kind of thing? Not to mention that he has, like, strung up his henchmen who are going to be prosecuted via whatever the law, but the villain in charge of it, he's going to be like, well, it's okay. Well, Clash can go off and rob me another day, I don't know. That just seemed like a weird way to end this book.
Yeah, it was a little abrupt. Abrupt and out of character, but, alas.
Yeah. But the book doesn't even end on that. It ends again with, like, Peter's, reflecting with, Johnny about his failure. And I just love these kind of friend scenes where Johnny is, like, supportive of him. He's like, yeah, you messed up. And, you should learn that about yourself, that you need to not be the CEO. You need to be the guy who's doing what he does best, and I have really appreciated reading that page. It was a nice reflection on everything that happened in, volume 4.
Yeah, I mean, and kind of also obviously a true nod to, to all the people who are like, oh, you can't tell this story of Peter as a CEO. It's unnatural. Well, it's like, yeah, it is, but that's why we told it, because this is what would have happened. And it ended predictably, but it was the journey that got us there that made it interesting,
Yeah, and there was that interesting line from Peter where he says, like, I forget the exact line, but he's like, I feel like I squandered something that I'll never be able to do again. And in a way, it's Dan Slott being like, we did it. Now no one can ever do this kind of story again.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah.
So do you have a grade on this, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't talked about Immonen, but, I mean, the guy is just rock solid. And I liked his redesign on Clash with the kind of the circles on him that kind of flatten his perspective a little bit. Did you pick up on that?
Yeah, I know. It was definitely a good look, and I mean, Immonen again was his usual on point self. I mean, as we kind of alluded to earlier, though, I mean, these issues, if in addition to lacking a villain, I mean, if there's any kind of flaw to them, is the chances for Immonen to really go crazy are somewhat tempered here. Like it's. He takes advantage of the opportunities he gets because he's great, but and I still feel like he's kind of really driving the narrative in how he kind of paces the pages. But it's not peak Immonen from an artistic standpoint.
Right. Well, every book has got to have some time to breathe a little bit, so I'm giving this one a B, but that's like a good B. Like I'm like, this is like not groundbreaking, but it's exactly what the series needs right now.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. It's a B, and it's a B I feel good about. It's not like I guess it's a B. No, it's a B.
Yeah, I'm very happy with it. All right, cool. I'm glad we got to talk about this. Well, listeners, I hope you enjoyed that review of Amazing Spider-Man number 790. Let me tell you guys a little bit more about our Patreon page.
Dan, come on. This is not like a PBS fundraiser here. No one wants to hear more about the Patreon. Our listeners know it's the best way to support us and get all these amazing episodes for just the price of one comic a month. So let's get right to the next issue, our review of Amazing Spider-Man number 791.
So let's talk about Amazing Spider-Man 791. This is the end of the Fall of Parker 3-part arc. And, starting right off from the get-go, that cover with him kissing Mockingbird. I think, Mark, you and I have been kind of criminal in our lack of mention of the details on the covers of these books. But I wanted to point this one out because I just think this one's a knockout.
Yeah, it's certainly one of the better ones. And, it's Yeah, I guess we don't talk about the covers all that much because, I mean, there are all these like Alex Ross interpretations. I mean, I for the most part like Alex Ross, but like, you know, I always used to kind of like him when it was more of a special event. Like, oh, he's doing a cover. Isn't this cool? And like, you know, for the better part of what, like 3 years now, he's been doing these covers. So
Yeah.
you're kind of like, oh, it's another Alex Ross cover. But this one is especially great. I mean, it's very dynamic. It's kind of playing up this Spider-Man Bobby romance, which, you know, we'll talk about when we talk about the contents of the issue itself. I mean, but it's like becoming actually a pretty interesting B story, I think, in Spider-Man right now. So good all around.
Yeah, nice to have a good old romantic, sexy cover to just lock it in.
Yeah, and it's romantic and sexy without, you know, there's no cheesecake in there or anything like that, you know. It's like it's just kind of like Spider-Man kissing a girl. There's nothing inappropriate about that, right?
Yeah, and she looks awesome too. So that's, you know, that's good too, right? She can be her own cool person.
Yeah. So look at us being good that way. But no, I mean, in terms of the contents of the story itself, I mean, you know, Dan, I did the review for this one on Superior Spider Talk, and I enjoyed it again. I think this whole arc as a whole has been a very good kind of jumping on point for readers. It's been dealing with things well. It's been dealing with Peter and his supporting cast well. There's very little I would change. At the same token, like, you know, there hasn't been I felt the greatest through line with the dramatic elements of this story, and especially in terms of villains and how they're treated. But I mean, I guess we're just having a cooling off period, and we're going to get a lot of that. Obviously, in the very near future, there's going to be a Venom story. There's going to be it sounds like another Osborn Green Goblin story. So, you know, I guess we could cool our jets a little bit when it comes to that and just focus on Peter and this cast. What about you? I mean, generally, I mean, I feel like you probably like this even a little more than I did.
Yeah, I think that's safe to say. I mean, I don't think that this is like a 3-part story that has like a beginning, a middle, and an end, really, other than kind of following Peter through, you know, getting a job and kind of locking in this relationship with Mockingbird. It's almost like 3 one-shots in a row, you know, single one-and-done stories in a row with like a light through line like we used to get in kind of old school Spider-Man tales, you know, like there isn't necessarily a villain. I mean, even when we do get a villain of some sort in this issue, it's like resolved in a kind of offhanded way. But I found this whole thing really, really refreshing. And, you know, if there's one thing I read Spider-Man comics for more than anything else, it's the characters and the supporting cast and how Peter's world works. And I got more than I could have expected out of this. And at the end of the day, you know what the big takeaway for me was? I really liked reading this Peter Parker. I like this guy. And it has been a long time since I've really liked Peter Parker. And I found someone familiar in this. And it's like re-meeting an old friend. And that's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, especially the consistency of this Peter Parker. I think that's worth noting because, I mean, we've seen this Peter Parker kind of poke his ears out, if you will, multiple times over the last few years, but we haven't gotten like a consistent dosage of this guy, you know, without some kind of self-sabotage or out of character spin or anything like that. And you know, in terms of any possible issues I might have with this comic right now, Peter Parker is the least of my concerns, which at the end of the day, when it comes to a Spider-Man comic, that's all you can ask for. I mean, you know, like it's very rare that everything is going to be executed with 100% precision, but you know, make sure that you get your core characters the right way. And I think throughout this comic, the core characters are great. You know, even the core supporting characters. You know, one thing I did notice specific to this issue that I felt was less of an issue in 789 and 790 was I did feel that there certain elements of the story kind of fell into that old Dan Slott habit. And I know he'll go on social media if he heard us say this and say, how could you criticize me for doing this? But I felt that there were elements of too much story trying to be told in this comic, like that there was too much kind of being squeezed into the confines. Like we were getting a lot of new characters being introduced, both heroes and villains and supporting cast people. You know, whereas the first 2 issues of this arc, there was kind of this very well-paced organic flow to how we were transitioning from beat to beat and from character to character. Here, a lot of it kind of just felt like rapid fire and things just kind of not really landing because, you know, we really weren't fully immersed in who some of these new characters were. And that was a little disappointing for me.
Yeah, I do feel that. I think the person that gets the shortest shrift is this kind of new tech guy that gets introduced and kind of literally sent out on a jet at the end of the issue. You know, he just kind of forgettable. He feels like a plot beat to get, you know, not only like, you know, Mockingbird's story moving forward, but also give something for Peter to do and get Harry and Liz into a new building. And I don't really mind it because it does move so many of those plots forward, but it does feel like this weirdly insignificant bump, you know, to kind of introduce a whole new character just for that. And you wrote something really great in your review that you felt like if he was seeded through the 3 issues, it would probably would have landed a little stronger.
Yeah, I mean, because all in the span of 1 issue, I mean, we're introduced to this character. We learn that he's a rival of Peter's in terms of tech. We learn that he's kind of not moving in on his girl per se, but because of Bobby getting this job with him is kind of creating this tension there. You know, then we find out that he's doing very nefarious things with the technology in terms of kidnapping the intelligence of this other villain to power these little I almost call them R2D2. Oh, that's so last generation of me.
Yeah, Peter refers to them as BB-8s.
Yes, as I say, BB-8 droid things. It's just a lot, and it just, you know, in the midst of all this, we're also meeting Peter's new science team, and we're getting moments between Peter and Robbie, which, let it be said, I thought the Peter Robbie sequences in this issue were brilliant. I love them. I love that banter. It just felt very at home and old school, but in a good way. Like the relationship is still evolving. It's not stuck in the past per se, but yet there's a familiarity to it that just made me want to keep reading more of these 2 characters together.
Can we say for 100% certainty that Robbie knows Peter is Spider-Man?
I think that's going to continue to be the great mystery that everyone thinks they know is true, but whatever.
I like it that way. I like it that way. It
doesn't matter. I think that's the point. It doesn't matter because Robbie is a man of integrity and principle, and he's going to do what he's going to do because he thinks it's right, regardless of who Peter is, who Spider-Man is, and all that. And I think Peter's either obliviousness to it or even suspicion of it. It just still doesn't matter. It doesn't change who these characters are, and I like that.
Yeah, me too. I thought that play back and forth was really great, and I love the criticisms that his new coworkers lay at his feet, that he's this sympathy hire, only to be reinforced by Robbie moments later. And, you know, that moment where Robbie's like, you know, oh, Peter, let's do lunch, and then it leaves the scene is a great indication of how this book is working. You know, it's a almost lyrical back and forth. You know, it's this wonderful interplay of dialogue that then leaves the scene at the exact right moment, and it's just fun. And I was like, this is a writer who's really got his mojo back, or is working with a team of people that know how to produce a comic with him with an incredible economy for, you know, what they're doing. It is remarkable that this is the same writer that wrote, you know, 30 issues of volume 3 and 4. It's unbelievable it's the same guy.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of amazing. I mean, Legacy is truly, I feel, bringing out the best in the old guard of characters here. I mean, it's like I don't know if this is by mandate or not, but I do feel that Marvel is like, after years of really trying to push the envelope, is like saying no, let's really acknowledge what made these characters favorites, or fan favorites. And I mean, we're just getting it in abundance here. I mean, these issues in their own kind of modern way feel very akin to like the DeFalco Friends days or the Stern JR days. Like, it's just like that kind of rhythm and swagger, like I think you used at one point here. I mean, like, there's a swagger to these stories that there hasn't been, and swagger is not always equates to confidence, because I feel like Dan Slott is a very confident storyteller. Whether we always agree with his confidence is another story, but here it's like there's just kind of, like you said, there's a rhythm and a swagger to things that is just making things click.
And the little details too. I want to highlight this because, like, this is the kind of weird joy, and I wish writers would really realize this. And I'm putting a lot of it on Stuart Immonen, is that it's the little joys that make these books fun to read. I don't know if you saw these things and were as tickled by them as I was, but like Peter's giddy face for his job, the kind of boyishness of that. I loved, and this is such an inexplicable thing, I loved the plaid interior of his shoes when we saw them on his bed. That kind of red and black plaid interior. It's like, of course he would hide his Spider-Man-ness in a bit of a way in his shoes, of all places. And then the image of him relaxing in his office, balancing a pencil on his finger perfectly. It's like, wow, what a confidence this character has too, to like just enjoy himself and express himself in such little ways. I love reading this. Yeah.
And I mean, props to Immonen for once again just bringing it every issue. I mean, we talked about how Peter and Mockingbird were presented artistically on the cover, but like, again, there's just something to how Immonen draws these characters, and there's, both these characters look great together, but there's nothing I feel like too stylized about it, if you catch my drift. It's just they look natural, and they're making very humanistic faces and expressions, and there's just a lot of like affection that's coming through, and I think that's part of the reason why, after kind of this storyline between the two of them not going anywhere, I feel like over the last few months it's finally starting to pick up steam. I think in large part because of how Immonen draws it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like the chemistry is more palatable because it's artistically, there's more chemistry artistically.
Yeah, that's a lot of it, and I think the writing is good too. I love this kind of like gender politics stuff that's going on in this issue. Like, it's kind of playful. And the kind of ways that you're feeling out a relationship and what people's roles are in the relationship, and like what are kind of safe lines to cross and things like that. The play with Quicksand, where he thinks it's Sandman and realizes it's actually a woman, and Mockingbird gets quick to remind him not everything is about you. And it's also kind of a dig on like, how everything is about men in these books. And I think this kind of continuing reference back to this kind of feminist, these feminist ideas, I think is really like a plus for this book and this relationship. It gives it a kind of like, maybe not danger, but like there's Mockingbird feels more headstrong than a lot of romance, our romantic leads than we've seen in Spider-Man book in quite a while.
Right. And I feel like also a lot of the gender politics that you're talking about, like it toes the line but never crosses the line of being heavy-handed. Like, there's always still kind of a tongue firmly in cheek in some of these things, you know what I mean? Like, it's and I think that's important, because the fact of the matter is some of this stuff is going to alienate or more aptly annoy or tick off certain readers and whatever. that's just going to happen no matter what because, stick to sports, right? You know what I mean? but like putting those readers aside, I mean, there's still a risk in going too far into the social politics of some of this, and to this point, I feel like it hasn't crossed that line yet. I feel like it's been good natured, but still with a message that is important, and I think that's good for comic books in 2017, right?
Yeah, I don't think it ever feels political. Like, it's always like fun. It's always poking fun. But it's never punching down or getting preachy. It's just, people acknowledging it. And if if acknowledgement is too far for you, then good luck in this world.
Right.
But to me, it's all brought a smile to my face because we definitely in this day and age should be poking fun of men and their role in the world, and why not do that in the pages of a comic in a tongue-in-cheek way?
Right. Plus, where else can we hear about Spocking Bird as a thing?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's got to stick around. Spocking Bird, I'm all for.
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of the status quo, where we seem to be headed, where Peter is the science editor, this seems like a good fit, right? This seems like, I mean, it's akin to him being the high school teacher. I think this is one of the better outside Spider-Man positions. I mean, I'm sure he'll screw it up somehow, but for now, it seems nice.
Yeah, it's a good way to kind of get him involved in things, and it seems like a natural thing. And Dan Slott's whole science angle with Peter, it's totally fitting for this ongoing narrative. I do wonder if it continues to box him in to doing these, Spider-Man science stories that we've gotten, a lot of in Volume 4 of the book. Even this issue is very much it's Peter and a tech magnate again. And I thought going into this kind of more relaxed status quo would move us away from Peter and the constant tech stuff. I'm okay with it. I just hope that it's not every issue that we're getting stuff like this.
Yeah, I mean, that element didn't bother me here because I kind of feel like we still have some loose ends to tie up in regards to Parker Industries, and certainly kind of seeing a rival kind of picking the carcass of Parker Industries. There's both a natural progression that comes with that, but also a natural humor that comes with that. So that didn't bother me, but I get what you're saying. But the kind of reliance that Slott has put on science in these books, going all the way back to Big Time. I mean, this is not a new thing. I think it's appropriate. It kind of goes back to even the whole thing with what Bendis did in Ultimate, where Peter was not the photographer, but the web intern. This is an essential part of who Peter is as a character, his science background, and yet we seem to spend big portions of the character's history ignoring that.
Yeah, I agree too. And yeah, I mean, what's better for Peter than science-based villains? Science gone wrong. That's most of his best villains. Even the Green Goblin is from something like that. I did have a couple of questions though about the Daily Bugle. Since when did the Daily Bugle get its skyscraper space back? I thought that they were still occupying the frontline offices. Did some radical change happen at post-Secret Wars that the Daily Bugle has now... The newspapers are back, Mark. They're a popular medium again.
I guess. I don't know. I mean, did Peter buy a new skyscraper for them at, when he became a billionaire? I mean, that would affect the bias of the reporting, though, wouldn't it?
Yeah. To me, it seems like maybe it was an imminent thing where he maybe hadn't read or been... Because they haven't really addressed it that much recently, what's going on with the Daily Bugle. But, as far as I know, they were just a small frontline office on the base level of a building I guess the last time we really saw them in detail was that like ages ago Hobgoblin story, where Phil Urich was kind of revealed to publicly be the Hobgoblin. Is that the real last visit to the Daily Bugle we've had?
It might be. Yeah, I can't think of, because I don't think we did much at the Bugle during Volume 4.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say yes.
Yeah, and as far as I remember, it was just like an open office grid. So I'm curious: is the Daily Bugle a skyscraper again? And lastly, what do you think we're getting Menace back again? Is that what this ending is teasing?
It's funny. I didn't even think Menace. I was wondering if we were getting more stuff with Norman, maybe. But
he's stealing their blood so that he can get his powers back.
Yeah, that's kind of where my brain. But Menace is a possibility too. So
yeah, she doesn't seem to be too far behind in a lot of these Norman stories recently.
So stay tuned.
Stay tuned. So Mark, what is your ultimate grade for this issue?
I gave this a solid B. I feel that this is it's a good B. Maybe the curve is being lowered. I don't know, but
I'll give it a B too. I was going to go a little higher, but I'm in a B. The curve is relaxed a bit, but and you can criticize us all you want about that, but I'm really digging this stuff, and to me it feels like Brand New Day Redux. Like there is a new breath in this series, and we're back to basics, but it feels more exciting than ever. So take that for what you will.
Yeah, I'm with you, Dan. I mean, this is the best this book has been consistently, probably since we first started the show. Well, that's it for now, at least until the end of the Venom Inc. stories. That's running from Venom Inc. Alpha to Venom Inc. Omega.
Oh, look at that. What an interesting thing they've set up there. Well, if you want to keep up with these exciting stories right alongside Mark and I, again, why not join our Patreon club? It's only the price of a comic a month, and it will help Mark and I continue creating all the awesome content. Plus, we've already reviewed over half of the Venom Inc. storyline, and you can jump right in and enjoy all those episodes, plus the over 25 others we've recorded throughout the year. And even better than that, Mark and I have just recorded an episode about the Red Goblin, our famous hotline that's become canon, seemingly. And also, we had a brief discussion about Dan Slott's suspected announced departure from the pages of Amazing Spider-Man. So if you want to join us for that conversation, just check it out on Patreon.
Either way, I hope you enjoyed this special bonus episode. And Dan and I will see you soon for an announcement featuring all the details about Season 2 of the show. So, Dan, speaking of which, where can we find you on the internet?
Yeah, of course, you can follow me on Twitter at SupSpiderTalk and read all of my writing and reviews on SuperiorSpiderTalk.com. Mark, how about yourself?
You could, of course, find me at Chasing ASM blog on Twitter. And please, please order my book, 100 Things Spider-Man Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die. Dan, even though, this is not a Patreon episode, perhaps we should share that sage old advice from Uncle Ben, right? Do you agree?
No, not really.
Oh.
You caught me at a bad time, Mark. I'm not really in the mood for sage advice.
I'm going to say it anyway. With great podcasts must also come the all-new Amazing Spider Talk.